going to get started, but I'm going to ask both parties. If someone doesn't know the answer, just say we don't know the answer. So I get it. I'm not trying to blow up anybody's strategy or thought process, but it'll go a lot quicker. If we don't know it, just say, I don't have that answer, and we're going to move on.
Yes,
So
sir.
I appreciate them, both parties. Thank you. You can go ahead.
Phyllis Sims with the law firm of Keen Miller representing Perdido Energy, Louisiana LLC. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to state for the record that this is a little unusual. We've got 3 tax years and 4 parishes. So if you'll indulge me a little bit, this is going to be a little tedious as I try to make the record clear. So, all right, thank you. So the next witness is Darren Fredrickson. So Mr. Fredrickson, please state your name for the record.
Yes, my name is Darren Fredrickson. I'm with Merit Advisors.
And please describe your educational background for the commission.
Yes, I hold a senior property tax consultant license from the state of Texas. Over the last 34 years of my career, I've taken hundreds of hours of training and classroom education on appraisal, property taxes in general, and many other topics related to my profession. Here in Louisiana, I led the tax committee for the Louisiana Oil and Gas Association from 1992 till 2022.
And please describe your work background for the commission.
Yes, ma'am. I began my career in 1991 with Affiliated Tax Consultants as a consultant and ultimately senior vice president. From 2005 through 2015, I was with Chesapeake Energy, where I established the property tax department and ultimately served in the role of tax director for many disciplines, including property tax, sales and use, and severance tax. Since 2016, I've served as a partner in Merit Advisors. In work throughout my career, I performed services in the area of compliance, valuation, negotiation, and the appeal process for property taxes in multiple states. Louisiana has been one of the states of particular focus for me. Additionally, I work in multiple states for rulemaking issues.
And you've testified before the commission before, correct?
Yes, ma'am, since 1992.
On oil and gas well properties, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and what is your current position with Merit Advisors?
I'm executive vice president and partner.
And during the 2019 to 2021 tax years at issue herein, what was your position with Merit?
I was a partner at the time.
When was Merit Advisors hired by Perdido to handle the property tax compliance related to the oil and gas properties at issue herein?
We began that in for tax year 2018.
And did you discuss the annual LAT reporting filings with Mr. Holden for each tax year 2019 through 2021?
He or members of his team.
And did Mr. Holden authorize you under Merit to file the annual renditions for each of the parishes for each of the years 2019 through 2021?
Yes, ma'am.
And did Merit timely file these LAT rendition forms for 2019 through 2021 in each of the parishes?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you directly involved with the filing of the LAT rendition forms and the supporting data for the 2019 through 2021 tax years for each of the parishes?
Yes, ma'am. Working with the team for Merit.
And I know Mr. Eddington has actually already covered this, but did Merit submit a cover letter to the assessor's offices with these LAT rendition form packets for each year, 2019, 2020, and 2021?
Yes, ma'am. Each parish had a cover letter on the front of it.
And there were supporting data submitted also with the rendition forms, which I also know has been briefly discussed. Can you give us a slight overview of the supporting data that was submitted with the rendition forms for 2019, 2020, and 2021?
Yes, ma'am. There was a reference to the PSA, which had been provided to the assessors because of the volume. We didn't attach a full copy of it each year. The 2018 loop capital appraisal, and then the required attachments, the LET 12A and such.
All right, I'm going to direct your attention to Exhibit 3. For each year, commissioners, you have an exhibit book, 2019, 2020, 2021. You can choose either the 2020 or 2021 book to look at this Exhibit 3.
Bill's book 3 for which year?
Uh,
19 first or?
You can do 2020 or 2021. It'd make it easier. And that's Exhibit 3. And I'm looking at Beauregard Parish, Exhibit 3. Okay. And can you please identify what Exhibit 3 is in each of these packages?
Yeah, this is the LAT filings for each of the parishes with cover letter.
And then please identify the first page of the Exhibit 3.
It's the standard cover letter we put on for the Perdido filings.
And was this cover letter material the same for each particular year, 2019, 2020, and 2021, and the same for each of the parishes?
Yes, ma'am, it was all materially the same.
And for each year, 2019, 2020, and 2021, does the merit cover letter expressly reference the $4 million purchase price?
Yes, ma'am.
And for each year, 2019, 2020, and 2021, does the merit cover letter expressly reference the purchase and sale agreement?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
And for each year, 2019, 2020, and 2021, does the merit cover letter expressly reference the Loop Capital appraisal report?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I'm going to direct your attention to the last paragraph of the cover letter. Let me move this over a little
Okay.
bit. All right, could you summarize for us what is stated in the last paragraph of the cover letter?
Yes, ma'am. Basically, it's the intention to discuss and work with the assessor in any way possible and provide wherever we could to come to an agreement, try to resolve the difference in the value.
And it's the content of this letter, again, is the same for each of the parishes in each year, correct? So the content of this paragraph is the same for each of the years.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and I'm going to direct your attention now specifically to the 2020 and 2021 cover letters. And let's look at the fourth paragraph.
Okay.
And the fourth paragraph summarize what the letter is conveying here.
It's conveying a concern that if the valuation process is continued as it is, that the taxes could potentially exceed 100% of the income of the assets. And that would have a very detrimental impact on the assets.
And so, and again, this cover letter is the same for each of the parishes in 2020 and 2021, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, let's go back to the last paragraph of that cover letter.
Okay.
So after making the lat rendition filings each year, did any of the assessors or anyone in the assessor's offices reach out to you or your team at Merit with any questions or requests for additional information in 2019,
Not to my knowledge.
2020,
Not to my knowledge.
and 2021?
No, ma'am, not to my knowledge.
On the flip side of that, following the filing of the rendition packages for each of the years, did Merit reach out to the assessor's offices on behalf of Perdido to follow up from these filings
Yes, my team reached out each year.
in each of the years? And our next witness, Mr. Lewis, will testify more about the communications with those, with the assessors. So let's move on now to the details about the tax renditions and the values by the assessors. Maybe I'll close this
Yes, ma'am.
book.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. Because I'm gonna pull up the next book.
May I ask one quick question? I know you're on a roll. Just what is the deadline for filing your lat forms?
I
So,
always say March 31, but it's April 1, I believe, with the actual.
okay. So you're representing that everything was filed timely in each of these 3 years?
Yes, sir, I believe
Thank
it
you.
was.
I don't believe that's in dispute, the timeliness of any of these filings.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Romig. We'd just like to have it for the record. So I'm going to pull the common documents book now. So let's discuss. For each of the years, 2019, calculation, 2019, 2020, and 2021.
So using the rules and regulation of tax commission, we established the serial number of the well, depth of the well, the zone, the region of the state the wells were in, calculated out the value to that point. And then if any of the wells were subject to shuttering credit or stripper credit or service credit, we applied that. And then beyond that, we took the allocation of the appraisal and asked for additional.
So you started with the tax commission table, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. Book on it. Sorry.
There you go.
Thank you, Ms. Bethune.
All right, so again, you started with the tax commission tables, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you factored in additional obsolescence for low production and shut-in credits?
Yes, ma'am.
Correct? And then you calculated additional obsolescence, again, on what basis?
We used the appraisal that had been provided, that had been presented to the tax commission, and allocated the value, weighted and allocated the value for that to arrive at that number overall.
And what support was provided to the assessor's offices to support the request for this additional obsolescence in 2019, 2020, and 2021?
Would have been the purchase sale agreement, the appraisal as we had talked about, and then just the regular LAT filings that we would have made.
Okay. And then, but you were here for the 2018 hearing
Yes, ma'am.
and testified.
Yes.
And so you were familiar with the ruling that came out. And so why did you continue to render in the same manner for 1920 and 2021 that had been done for 2018?
We had pending, there was still a pending case, pending issue. It had not been resolved. And so we didn't feel it was appropriate to change anything while the case was ongoing through the courts.
And in fact, there wasn't a final resolution in the 2018 matter until after these were filed, correct?
That's my belief. Yes, ma'am.
So now I'm going to direct your attention just real quick in the common documents binder to exhibit 7.1A, 7.1B, and 7.1C. And that's for 2019, 2020, and 2021. Just tell us what these documents are quickly.
This document summarizes the assessments, the assessed value, the assessor value, the taxpayer value, the total tax amount, what was under dispute and what was not under dispute.
And then in connection with this, Exhibit 7 also is the payment under protest documents that also shows the disputed versus undisputed amounts and the tax amounts and the difference in the values. All right, now I'm going to direct your attention to in the common documents binder to exhibits 19A, 19B, 19C.
I feel like I should help with it.
Oh, thank you. And the exhibits 19A, 19B, and 19C, what are these exhibits?
This is the Chapter 9 Rules and Regulations from the Tax Commission at the time.
And I'm going to turn to, let's turn to page OG 5.
Okay.
And we're going to focus on section 907, which is the procedure for arriving at assessed value. So the procedure at the bottom of page OG 5, what is it? What's the date in parentheses?
2010,
And the next page, OG 6, what is the date in parentheses?
2016.
So these procedures for the valuation of oil and gas wells were in place well before that these were rendered.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is the correct rules and regulations and the procedure for the renderings.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so let's go through then the procedure. And the purpose of this is to show where the renditions diverge from the assessor's valuations. All right, so can you walk us through the valuations?
Yes, ma'am. Similar to what we were talking about a moment ago, you start off with the determination if it's in region 1, 2, or 3. That determines the appropriate table to be applied. Then you multiply the percent good based on the serial number of the well. And again, that's on, I believe, B2. And then we use the, well, then it talks about how you would affect an assessment on a service well. And then you would basically multiply, like we were talking about this, the age times the depth times the appropriate table to arrive at the assessment of the wells.
And so in those steps 1 through 5, do your calculations by merit and your review of the assessor's calculations, those were the same up to that point, correct?
Yes, the assessors calculated the same basis we did.
Okay. And then let's look at steps 6A and 6B. And what are those steps?
6A is the adjustment for economic obsolescence that's defined for certain categories, low producers, service wells, shut-ins, that sort of thing.
And then 6B is
The
for
6B
shut-in.
is the shut-ins, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so up to that point, basically in your renditions by merit for each of the tax years and your review of the assessor's calculations, do you believe that those were the same
Yes,
through those steps?
yes, ma'am. I think we had all that. We worked through all of that.
Okay, so the next step, 6C, D, and E. Tell us about those steps.
So I'm just going to read if that's easier. C is deduct any additional obsolescence that's been appropriately documented by the taxpayer as warranted to reflect fair market value. D is all oil and gas property assessments may be based on an individual cost basis. And E, sales properly documented should be considered by the assessor as fair market value, provided the sale meets all tests relative to it being a valid sale.
So, so in your review, is this where the renditions diverge from the assessor's calculations?
Yes, ma'am. I think the difference is C and E.
All right, and tell us again, what is 6E?
E is sales properly documented should be considered by the assessor as fair market value, provided the sale meets all tests relative to it being a valid sale.
So in this dispute, what we're really talking about is a dispute about an adjustment for additional economic obsolescence, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so that particular provision, sales properly documented and, should be considered by the assessor as fair market value. About how long has that provision been in these rules and regulations?
Well, but just looking at the page, I know at least 2016, but I have been testifying in front of this commission, working on rules and regs since 1992. And I believe it's been in there at least 10 or 15 years prior to that, I believe.
And you're really familiar with this. Do you recall what the reasoning was for putting this in the regulations?
And my memory of it is that there was, when we were going through all these tables, there was always a lot of dispute about how the table should work. And this was put in there to give the assessor and the taxpayer latitude in instances where the sale price didn't jive with what the calculation came out to.
So in your review, and the calculations, did the assessors allow for any additional obsolescence based upon the sale price or the appraisal for 1920 and 2021?
No, ma'am.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the constitutional amendment then in 2020.
Okay.
There was a constitutional amendment in 2020 to Article 7, Section 4. Tell us about the history of that and just tell us what was behind that.
We had the assessors in the industry, we had all worked on these tables and the methodology for years. Really were hamstrung a little bit by the ability to look at the income approach to value and the production. And so we all kind of came together. Well, we absolutely came together, put together a joint proposal through the legislature, ran a constitutional amendment. The taxpayers of the state or the voters of the state approved it. And it allowed for us to be able to shift to an income approach to value.
And there was a joint proposal to the legislature, correct?
Yes,
Tell us about that.
Yes, it was nerd out a little bit, but it was pretty exciting. Everybody coming together after all the years of working together, presenting together, and recognizing that we had some work to be done. And it was very well received, obviously, by the legislature and by the taxpayers.
And so what was behind that again? I mean, is it safe to say that the joint proposal was made because it was widely recognized that in many instances, the tables and the way these rules worked just did not result in a fair value for the oil and gas properties?
Yes, yeah. When you think about the cost approach, especially a scheduled cost approach for a well that's an income producing well or property in general, it's very hard to say it costs $10 million, so it's worth that depreciated over a certain period of time. They're bought and sold based on their ability to produce income. And so we recognize that was probably the best approach to go, and that's what we built out from.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Frederickson,
Yes, sir.
going back to some of Mr. Holden's testimony, would it be fair to say that you were the point person that actually filed the returns with the assessors on behalf of Perdido?
Yes.
Okay.
My team did.
Yeah, not a trick question. I kind of want to make sure because you kept referring to merit, and I thought that was you. A moment ago, when you were going through the returns you had filed, Mr. Ms. Sims asked you, why'd you keep following the same thing? And you referenced pending litigation and said you didn't think it was appropriate to change. Can you explain that?
Sure.
Kind of caught me off guard and
Okay.
I didn't take real good notes.
Okay, so the idea was that we'd had an appeal, 2018, and we presented all that data with the renditions. The case was still out in the courts or with whatever level of, depending on each year, whatever level of appeal
Sure.
it was under. And so we provided the same data to support the position that we had taken originally.
Can I ask a question? When was the Court of Appeals decision rendered?
I don't have the district court ruling date. The Court of Appeals was in late actually mid 2020. The Supreme Court was in late 2020, like December.
When was it?
Okay, Mr. Frederickson, you went through the renditions you filed with Ms. Sims a moment ago in Taxpayer Exhibit 3. And you went through 19, 20, and 21, and you said basically they were the same for each parish and across each of those 3 years.
So they were similar, yes, or materially same.
And I want to be clear, they were also the same as what was provided in 2018,
Yes, sir, that's correct.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now starting in 20 and then also in 21, you add a statement that you referenced earlier. As was stated in the appeal hearing before the Louisiana Tax Commission in October, the property value and resulting taxes due have consumed much of the gross income of these wells since the acquisition. You testified that all you provided them was the appraisal and the purchase and sale agreement. Did you provide them with any documentation showing that the property value and resulting taxes due have consumed much of the gross income of the wells?
No, sir.
Okay, and just to be clear, I'm gonna read from the Court of Appeals ruling. In support of this request, Perdito provided the assessor defendants with a copy of the purchase and sale agreement and the Calvanico appraisal, but not the data forming the basis of the appraisal or an explanation of the methodology or calculations, despite the fact that the burden was on Perdito to produce sufficient data and information to substantiate its claim. And just to be clear, you provided the same information to the assessors in 2019, 2020, and 2021. Did you not?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. And at that hearing, you testified, they actually quote your testimony in the Court of Appeals ruling. In referencing your testimony, they say, after preparing the forms as he normally would using the LTC rules, he then took Mr. Calvanico's answer on his appraisal and backed into obsolescence it would take to get the difference between what the schedule called for and what Mr. Calvanico's number was. And that's what you did in 19, 20, and 21. You calculated obsolescence based solely upon the Calvanico appraisal. Did you not?
That is correct.
And again, scratch, I'll get that in a second. So in each of the years, and I want to include 18, 19, 20, and 21, you requested obsolescence based solely on the Calvanico appraisal.
Yes, sir.
You never presented a request for obsolescence or any calculations for obsolescence based upon an allocated sales price, did you?
No, sir.
Have you read the Court of Appeals ruling in this matter?
No, sir. I read through the summary page, to be honest.
Okay. Well, I want to read you a couple of things that the Court of Appeals said. It is the party seeking a fair market value reduction for its property based on obsolescence who has the burden of producing sufficient data and information to substantiate its claims. Do you understand that to be a taxpayer's requirement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Court of Appeal also said that the assessor retains the discretion to determine whether the taxpayer has substantiated its obsolescence. Are you aware of that rule of law?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you testified a moment ago that you attended the 2018 hearing,
Yes, sir.
and all of the assessors testified that they did not consider the information that you submitted to be sufficient to warrant a reduction in value for obsolescence. So why didn't you submit any additional documents, evidence, or information to the assessors to support Perdito's obsolescence request in 2019, 20, or 21?
As I'd stated before, we continued on with the practice we had because we didn't have our final ruling on everything yet.
Okay, so you were sticking with your 2018 case until the court told you different.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Okay, in the appeal from the 2018 ruling, the First Circuit held that the purchase and sale agreement reflected the sale of a going concern and not a simple asset purchase agreement. And as such, the sales price alone, without more information and further explanation, was not indicative of the fair market value of the property. Did you provide more information or further explanation about the sales price to the assessors in 2019, 2020, or 2021?
No, sir.
Why not?
Again, it was all still in dispute, and part of the dispute and part of the discussion was that this was an asset transaction and not a going concern.
But you do realize that the Court of Appeal ruled differently, do you
I
not?
understand that.
Okay.
yes.
May I ask a point of clarification? I apologize for interrupting. So as I appreciate the representation, previous tax commission ruled that there was insufficient evidence to determine the type of sale it was, citing or opining that it was a going concern.
Not exactly. Well, let me read you the direct quote. The purchase and sale agreement reflected a sale of a going concern and not a simple asset purchase agreement. As such, the sales price alone, without more information and further explanation, was not indicative of the fair market value of the property. And that's from the Court of Appeal.
So that was the opinion of the tax commission that went before the Court of Appeal.
Yes. Yeah, it says yes. And then the First Circuit analyzed it, came to the same conclusion in their ruling. Okay. Mr. Ferguson, in the 2018 judicial review, the Court of Appeal also noted that you provided the assessors with a copy of their Calvanico appraisal, and I quote, but not the data forming the basis of the appraisal or an explanation of the methodology or calculations, despite the fact that the burden was on Perdito to produce sufficient data and information to substantiate its claim. Did you provide the assessors with the data forming the basis of the appraisal or an explanation of the methodology or calculations in 2019, 2020, or 2021?
That's not data that I would have had the expert prepared that, so the answer is no.
No.
I have a question, just while we're here. When we talk about the obsolescence that you're backed into, okay? And I've read a bunch of this stuff, and so if I'm misquoting, I'm sorry.
No, it's
That's why I want to get this straight. Did you understand where the obsolescence came from yourself? Did you understand the data?
I guess I don't understand the question, sir. I'm sorry.
I think I read where maybe you had testified that you yourself didn't know where the obsolescence came from. It was just in the appraisal, but you
That is
didn't
correct.
actually know where the data came from.
That is correct. I did not.
Is that common practice to want obsolescence on something, but yet not really know where it came from? Because
Sorry.
an appraisal is a matter of opinion, but it's got to be a matter of opinion that's backed up with data that can be shown, explained. And so to me, as I'm reading, it's hard for me to understand why we're talking about millions of dollars. We want to use obsolescence and you're requesting it, but nobody knows how to explain it or where it came from. It's just in the appraisal. And if I remember correctly, as I looked at the appraisal, There were just numbers for it. There wasn't any actually data showing where it came from, even in the appraisal. So I'm just curious if that is a common practice to use information like that you yourself can't explain because you don't know where the data came from.
So it
Tick.
is when we get a report from an expert who's been hired to do a specific job. I'm performing a service as an advocate for the taxpayer. I'm providing the data. I'm advocating for them. I'm not an unbiased third party doing the appraisal. So yes, sir, it is common practice that I would accept their work.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And I'm gonna ask both parties to acknowledge nothing changed from 18, 19, 20, 21. We can quit asking that same question in different ways. We all agree that nothing changed
Well,
to do it.
I'm going to violate that with my closing question just slightly. But I do want to close with the same question I closed with Mr. Frederickson. I'm with, Mr. Holt. Mr. Frederickson, you're
Yes,
the
sir.
person that actually filed the returns each of these years for Perdido, 18, 19, 20, and 21.
Yes, sir.
So here's what I'm going to ask you to explain to me.
Okay.
If Perdido failed to carry its burden of proving an entitlement to a fair market reduction for its property based on obsolescence for the 2028 tax year. And again, that's a direct quote from the Court of Appeal. How did you, as a person that made these filings for Perdido in 2019, 2020, and 2021, how did you carry Perdido's burden of proving an entitlement to an obsolescence reduction in 2019, 20, and 21, when all you did was submit the same information?
And I don't mean to sound redundant, sir, but there was not closure to everything at the point in time, so we were still maintaining our position.
And again, what was the final outcome of that position on litigation?
I believe it was.
That's been asked and answered. Let's move on.
Couldn't resist. No
So-
further questions.
Wait, just to revisit a timeline. 2018 was appealed with a March 2018 letter or 2019 letter?
So each tax year is live. So in 18, you would appeal 18, 19, 2020, and 2021.
Okay. So at the time you were filing 19, 20, and 21, the movement by the tax commission and moving possibly to the court was prior to the March or April 1 of 2019 timeline? So when you're filing your appeal for 2019,
Yes, sir. It would,
it was known by the action of the tax commission prior to April 1 of 19, that 2018, that they had decided that not enough information
No,
was provided.
our hearing for 2018 was in October of 2019.
Okay, so subsequent to 2019, but certainly prior to filing 20 and 21.
Yes.
And if I may clear up the record, I mean, Mr. Edgington and I have multiple cases, so sometimes the dates get jumbled.
Yes, they do.
So, the timeline. So, the 2018 hearing was held in October of 2019. The First Circuit did not rule until September of 2022. And then the Supreme Court denied the writ in December of 2022. So we didn't know until December of 2022 that the 2018 matter was final. Then it was the D90 Energy decision that was issued in October of 2020.
When did the tax commission make their ruling on the initial appeal for 2018?
October 19.
Well, they would have taken it under advisement. The hearing was October of
I think I've got the ruling.
2021.
No.
I mean, I'm sorry, of October of 2019. Sorry about that. And so it would have been, yeah, sometime after that.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, I
certain,
do not have a copy. of the
so,
ruling.
so it seems, in my understanding, that the 2019 appeal was filed before any decision, first
Correct.
starting with the tax commission
Correct.
from 2018.
Correct.
But perhaps for the 2020 and 21 appeals, at least it was known what the tax commission's feelings were on this matter. because that would have been April of 2020 and April of 2021
I
for
believe
those
that- I
appeal
believe that is
timelines.
correct. Yes.
Any other questions, Mr. Ron? I have a question, and if you don't want to answer, you don't have to.
Yes, sir.
I assume you're gonna file, when you file the upcoming year, you're gonna add some information to your filing? Or are you gonna stick to the same and
No.
just file it?
The methodology's changed since, so this issue doesn't, it's not standing any longer.
Okay, thank you.
No further questions.
I have one question, just so it's on the record, because some of y'all's testimony was talking about the income approach and how we come together, which I think is great. But what methodology was it in for 19, 20, and 21?
It was, the cost approach was the primary method, but you could consider sales per 6E.
But it wasn't on the income approach at
No.
that point in time.
So, Mr. Chair, this, again, I never know when's the right time to ask a question, so if it's not the right time, I appreciate that. So going to exhibits 19A, B, or C, as far as functional and or economic obsolescence shall be considered in the analysis of fair market value as substantiated by the taxpayer in writing. So the taxpayer is representing that the cover letter and what's presented there, together with their lat forms, together with the purchase agreement and the independent appraisal, it's their belief that that was their submission in writing that substantiated their claim for obsolescence.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Consistent with revised statute 47, the assessor may request additional documentation. So from the assessor's standpoint, did the assessors request any additional documentation from what was submitted on that?
Press me.
Yes, sir.
We're gonna get that. One of the parishes did, and that's a great question because there's a long line of cases that talk about the fact that, and they're representing this one, that it is the taxpayer's burden to present, not the assessor's burden to request. There were some requests. In fact, there was some additional information provided in 1 year. And I think particularly the first witness we're going to call up is going to be the Beauregard assessor. And she has all those dates that that additional information was provided. But yeah, there were discussions. And I know in 2019, they said, no, we're not going to give you anything else. And 2020, I may be having the dates wrong. I believe it was in 2020, they again produced nothing. And then in 21, when there was a third round of discussions, they produced a reserve report, which is a future projection of revenues, but with no supporting documentation that was not used by the assessor.
So in your appreciation, whether it's the term shall, must, shall, or may, the revised statute says the assessor may, so it's at the
Yes.
discretion of the assessor whether to request additional documentation.
Yes, that's driven by practicalities. Any individual parish is going to have thousands upon thousands of assessments, and they have to rely on what the taxpayer submits. They don't have time to start bird dogging them and chasing. What else do you have? And again, practically, they don't know what records they do have. They don't know what to request. And again, that's why the courts have repeatedly says it's the taxpayer's burden to present it to the assessor.
Any other questions?
One more witness, Mr. Chair.
That's fine.
So, Mr. Chairman, our next witness is Keelan Lewis, and for the court reporter, Kielyn. So, Mr. Lewis, please introduce yourself for the commission.
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner, my name is Keelan Lewis.
And this is your first time testifying before the commission, correct?
No, it should be, I was,
No, second time?
Yeah.
No, second time, okay.
Welcome to the
Okay.
Thunderdome.
You got one more than us under your belt.
All right, Mr. Lewis, describe your educational background for the
Uh,
commission, please.
Yes, ma'am. Commission, I have my bachelor's degree in business management as well as my master's in business administration that I received from the University of Incarnate Word. I hold my property tax consultant license from the state of Texas. Over the last 7 years of my career, I've taken many hours of training and classroom education on appraisal and property taxes in general.
And describe your work background for the commission.
Yes, ma'am. I began my career at Merit Advisors the summer of 2017 as a tax assistant. Over the years, I've worked to grow my general property tax knowledge by first getting my property tax consultant license from the state of Texas. I'm also currently a member of the Institute of Professionals in Taxation, in which I've passed the following courses: Property Tax School, Personal Property Tax School, and Real Property Tax School. In the work throughout my career, I performed services in areas of compliance, valuation, negotiation, and appeal process for property taxes in multiple states, Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma being the one that I'm heaviest in.
And what is your current position with Merit Advisors?
I'm a manager.
And during the 2019 through 2021 tax years at issue herein, what was your position with Merit?
My title is tax consultant.
And were you directly involved with the filing of the lat rendition forms and supporting data for the 2019 through 2021 tax years in each of the parishes?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you directly involved with assembling the lat filing packets and then filing with the assessor's office for the 2019, 2020, and 2021 tax years?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
All right, let's talk about the details of the filing of those lat rendition forms and the supporting data. And let's start with 2019. So tell us what was involved and tell us what was filed in 2019 with the assessor's offices.
Yes, ma'am. So in that packet would have been the cover letter, the Lat 12, the Lat 12A attachment, which the A attachment will have the serial number as well as the production. We also include a detailed well sheet, which this will have the serial number, well name, the production depth, Somers well code, as well as the obsolescence adjustment. We also referenced the PSA, the purchase sale agreement, and then we also included the 2018 Loop Capital Appraisal.
And once again, for the court reporter, SONRIS, all caps, SONRIS, an acronym. And so for the 2020 tax year, reporting these oil and gas well properties, run us down the list of everything that was provided.
Yes, ma'am. This was similar to 2020. In that packet, it was the cover letter, the Lat 12, the Lat 12A attachment, which again, well serial number and the production, the well detail listing. So you have the well serial number, well name, production depth, Somers code, as well as the obsolescence adjustment. We also referenced the purchase sale agreement, and then we also included the 2018 Loop Capital Appraisal.
And then the last year for 2021, tell us about the details of that year.
So 2021 was very similar. We had the cover letter in that packet, as well as the Lat 12, the Lat 12A attachment, which is going to have your well serial number, as well as the production data, the detailed listing, the well detail sheet that we provide, which has a serial number, well name, production depth, Somers code, as well as the obsolescence adjustments. And then we also referred to the purchase sale agreement, and then we also included 2018 Loop Capital Appraisal.
And then in connection with Beauregard Parish for 2021, there was a little bit extra provided after some communications with the assessor, correct, or the assessor's office, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. After communications with Beauregard, we also sent in a reserve report.
So describe for us, what is the SONRIS system?
So it stands for Strategic Online Natural Resources Information System. It is a DNR database, and this database contains information such as whether it's a oil, gas injection well, production depth. It has the serial numbers, what parish it's in, spud dates, well status, etc.
And so basically, what kind of tool is this? What is it used for?
So this is a tool provided for tracking and drilling and production activity.
And where does the information in the SONRIS system come from?
Oil and gas operators are required to report this to the DNR for inclusion into the SONRIS database.
And is this information in the SONRIS database available to the public?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
So do you need any special access to look at this data, any special code, any special link or anything like that?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so, and once you're in there, can you manipulate the data?
No, ma'am. This data is just for viewing purposes.
All right, you mentioned that you filed a LAT 12 Attachment A, and that's required to be filed with the LAT 12, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And did that production data, then did you access the Sunrus system, which then the oil and gas operators would enter that information? Did you access the Sunrus system to complete your Attachment A to the LAT 12, which is required?
Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
And what information is actually shown on the LAT 12 Attachment A?
So again, you'll have your well serial number, whether it's an oil or gas well. You have your monthly production, and then you'll also have a spot where you can mark if it's shut in or not.
And so for each of these tax years, you would have reported the production data for the prior year. Because the assessment date is January 1st of the year, you would have used the production data for the prior year, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
So for example, for the 2019 tax year, you would have reported the monthly production data from 2018, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And then so forth with the other years.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so after making these, the filings of these LAT rendition packages to the assessor's offices in 2019, 2020, and 2021, did any of the assessors or assessor's offices, anyone in the assessor's offices reach out to you to ask any questions or discuss the filings or ask for additional information in
No.
2019,
No, ma'am.
2020,
No, ma'am.
2021?
No, ma'am.
So nobody had any questions?
No, ma'am.
So on the flip side of that, then did you reach out to the assessors on behalf of Perdido to ask if the assessors had any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
And you jotted down your notes,
Correct. Yes.
and it
ma'am.
was by phone, email, or
It was a combination of both phone and email.
okay. And just a little background here, Mr. Chairman. I've been doing this for 20 years, and the commissions historically, and I think Mr. Eddington will agree, sometimes when we'd start a hearing, they would ask, what have y'all done to communicate with the assessors? And if they didn't feel like there was enough communication, they would halt the hearing, send us on our way and say, come back after you talk with the assessors. So some of this exercise is just to show, hey, there's been this attempt by both sides to communicate before we got here. And so let's run down those communications. So start with 2019 by parish.
Yes, ma'am. So Beauregard, August 2019, I reached out via phone to the assessor's office, in which I spoke with Rhonda Ferris, asked if there was any further information we could provide to get closer to our rendered value. Mrs. Ferris' response was along the lines of, we will consider any additional information you feel will help. For Evangeline, August 2019, I reached out to the assessor's office and spoke with Joshua, and gonna pronounce this wrong, I'm sorry, Fontenot,
Very good.
in which I was asked if there was further, information we could provide to get closer to our render value. Joshua responded the assessor was going to stand by the assessed values. August 2019, Rapides Parish. I reached out to the assessor's office via phone, spoke to Becky Moore, in which I asked if there was any further information we could provide to get closer to our rendered value. Ms. Moore stated she was going to discuss with the assessor, but I don't believe there was any follow-up with me from the office. And then Vernon, August 2019, made a phone call to the assessor's office in which I spoke to John Blakenbaker, in which I asked again if there was any further information we could provide to get closer to our rendered value. His response was they would stick by the LTC guidelines.
All right, and that was 2019. So the communications in 2020 with each of the parishes.
Yes, ma'am. So in 2020, starting with Beauregard, on June 25th, 2020, following up from a phone call from that same date, I reached out to Ms. Rhonda Ferris, thanking her for correcting a well value that was lacking a shut-in credit. I confirmed that Ms. Ferris would have the assessor contact me to see if there was any additional information we could provide to get closer to our rendered value. On July 8th, 2020, Ms. Ferris responded, any information you feel would be helpful in supporting your request for obsolescence. August 31st, 2020, I reached out to Ms. Ferris, checking on her and her family after the storm, asking if there was any specific anything specific that may better show support, and I would reach out to Perdido to get that information to the assessor as needed.
And there
Um,
was no request for information though,
correct, no,
correct?
ma'am.
Okay.
For Evangeline Parish, I called Evangeline on 6/25/2020, in which I spoke to the clerk asking when notices would go out. The response I got was she would have Cody Jones call me, when he got back to the office, August 28, 2020. I then sent an email to Cody Jones asking if there was any additional information we could provide to get closer to our rendered value. To my knowledge, I never received a response from Mr. Jones. Rapides Parish, I called Rapides Parish 7/6/2020, in which I spoke to the clerk again, asking when notices would be sent out. She responds, she would have someone give me a call to help answer that question. I don't believe there's any further communication from that one. And then
Vernon?
Vernon, August 2020, I called Mr. Blankenbaker looking for notices of assessment. On August 25th, 2020, Mr. Blankenbaker sent me those notices of assessment. And then on August 28th, 2020, I reached out to Mr. Blankenbaker asking if there was additional information we could provide to get to our rendered value. I don't believe there was any response.
And so let's go the 2021 year, the last year.
So 2021, starting with Beauregard, this was the email on August 25th, 2021 to Ms. Rhonda Ferris. So I reached out to Mrs. Ferris asking if there was any additional information we could provide on top of the rendition and the PSA to get to the obsolescence that has been requested, and any information to get to our rendered, to get to our number, get our number closer to our rendered value. Please let me know and I will try to get that provided. I received an email from Ms. Ferris, August 26, 2021. She responds, they will consider any documentation you have. August 31st, 2021. To that response, I sent the reserve report, as we mentioned earlier, to see if this information would be, additional information would be sufficient. On August 31st, 2021, that same day, Ms. Ferris responded saying she would forward this information to the assessor. September 1st, 2021, with a letter attached, Ms. Ferris responded with a letter from the assessor with select equipment in which 20% obsolescence was offered and select wells in which 40% obsolescence was offered. The letter was sent at 11:45, September 1st, 2021. The letter also stated this offer would have to be accepted by the end of the day, September 1st, 2021, on company letterhead.
And even though that was a quick turnaround, were you able to communicate with the Perdido representatives about that effort, about that letter?
Yes, ma'am.
And then collectively, you and some of the merit team and the Perdido representatives looked at the offer. Again, it was an offer of 20% obsolescence on select equipment only and 40% obsolescence on select wells. And collectively, y'all ran the numbers and tell us about what the result of the numbers and the reduction would be.
The result of the numbers, it's kind of similar to what, Josh kind of, I believe he spoke on it earlier, the total taxes for all that with just the select equipment on the wells and then selected wells, it's around $5,000 of a tax reduction.
Okay. And so the offer was not accepted, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so then discuss the last three parishes for 2021 real quick.
Yes, ma'am. So Evangeline, August 25th, 2021. I reached out to Joshua asking if there was any additional information that we could provide on top of the rendition and the PSA for Perdido to get closer to the obsolescence requested. Joshua responded August 26, 2021, that considering the continued court proceedings regarding the previous year's protest, their office will continue to wait for the outcome of the hearing. Repeats, August 25th, 2021. I reached out to Caroline asking if there was any additional information that we could provide to get to our value. To my knowledge, I never received a response, just a notification that my email had been delivered and read. Vernon, August 25th, 2021. I reached out to John Blakenbaker asking if there was any additional information we could provide to get closer to our rendered value. And to my knowledge, I never received any response.
Okay, so during your phone and email conversations of 2019 through 2021, did anyone in the assessor's offices have any questions about the filing of the LAT forms, the renditions themselves?
No, ma'am.
What about the LAT 12 attachment A's?
No, ma'am.
What about the purchase and sale agreement?
No, ma'am.
What about the purchase price?
No, ma'am.
What about the appraisal report?
No, ma'am.
What about the allocation of the purchase price?
No, ma'am.
Any questions about any of the supporting information?
No, ma'am.
Any request other than this back and forth with Beauregard in 2021? Any request for additional information?
No, so the 2021 Beauregard, they didn't request the information. It was just the, the vague, any additional information. So in that case, that's when we sent the reserve report. And then that's when we also received that offer that they gave us.
And I have no further questions.
Just a couple of questions. Sir, you've heard testimony, so I'm not gonna be reading the whole Court of Appeals ruling. You're aware that it is the party seeking a fair market value reduction for its property based on obsolescence who has the burden of producing sufficient data and information to substantiate its claim.
Yes,
Are
sir.
you not? Okay. You apparently had concerns after years of ongoing litigation that the information you submitted was not sufficient. I don't believe you're at the 18 hearing, were you?
Yes, sir.
You were?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you heard all the assessors testify that they did not consider the information you submitted to be sufficient.
Yes, sir.
So why didn't you on your own submit more information to them?
My ask was, is there any additional information? And at that time, I didn't know what that would be without them, being specific on what that might have been. On top of the PSA, the lat 12s, and the Loop Capital appraisal.
The Loop Capital appraisal, that's the Calvanico appraisal. I want to make sure we're talking about the same document.
Correct, yes,
Okay.
sir.
I'm sorry about that. And so when you reference the Loop Capital, that's what's also referred to as a Calvanico appraisal, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So now you testified you didn't know what they wanted. Now, by the same token, how were the assessors supposed to know what information you had or Perdido had that you could provide to substantiate the obsolescence request?
I do not know the answer to that.
Thank you. No further questions.
No questions.
Last question. Ron, you have witnesses you're gonna call?
I do.
Okay, would anyone object if we break for 20 minutes
Not at all.
and Stefanoff, if you want to grab a quick bite? Let's do this. It's 11:52. We'll reconvene at 12:30. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, thank you. So we will stand adjourned till 12:30.